So the session here is about dealing with confrontations. And we don't know where you're at in terms of, there's probably people in this room who are coming in here fresh. Maybe you haven't had a lot of experience leafleting or being out on the streets speaking up for animals, and there's probably some really diehard veterans in here and probably everything in between. And we sort of decided that we're going to have this sort of more like a freestyle conversation rather than, my presentation than Nick's presentation. We're just going to kind of, we both are kind of on the same page, and we're just going to kind of chime into the conversation, but we also encourage you to bring up your ideas too, or if something that we're saying brings up a thought, it's much more sort of interesting and probably a lot more valuable for people just to contribute, because you guys all have your own real life experiences and feelings and issues when it comes to helping speak out for animals. So
if you have a question while we're talking, feel free to shoot up a hand. I think we'll do it more. Because every situation with demonstrations or outreach is always different, and so, I think we have some different approaches, but at the same time, a lot of commonalities from just experience after, dealing with thousands of protests and outreach events. So, shoot up a question if you have one.
Well, my experience here in Portland, I've been doing outreach for circuses against fur stores like Schumacher Furs, OHSU against their primate research, and have been at many, many public demonstrations. And it seems like there is an issue. Some people are really reluctant to even attend those kinds of events because there's this notion that you're going to have confrontations with people, that it's going to be a conflict, that maybe you don't know how to answer a certain question, or you just don't like to deal with conflict and people coming at you. And there's a whole gamut of sort of gradations of how much an event could have conflict. Ranging from, just tabling, which is pretty mild. People are approaching you, so they obviously probably want some information, to leafleting for vegan outreach and just handing out literature, to maybe actually attending a demonstration, which might be more conflict-oriented, or, the other extreme, which could be home demos and things like that. So we're going to talk about, all of these different issues and, what kind of happens when you attend these sort of events.
Yeah, there's no formula. I think between us, hundreds and hundreds of demonstrations over the years. You've been out over a decade. I've been about a decade or so, and every sort of demo is from anti-fur campaigns to anti-vivisection campaigns. So when the circus comes to town, to protesting in front of embassies, to home demonstrations, to tabling pretenders in concerts and whatever. So unsurprisingly, I think most of the type of demonstrations or outreach events you can pretty much predict. In my experience, you can assume most of the time tabling is going to be relatively non-confrontational, whereas some sort of protests are going to be, there's generally a lot higher energy and a lot more emotions are flowing, and you can often anticipate some more confrontation that you'll be having with people. And then obviously at the other extreme is doing home demonstrations, where it's often that the tensions are running high, law enforcement is most likely involved. But by and large, those are the extremes, and the majority of the demonstrations that we've done and protests and outreach events have really been, the potential for conflict and hostilities is really minimized by just knowing what you're going and getting yourself into, and kind of planning accordingly. One of the things that you should always have at a demonstration, and sometimes even tabling events, is a video camera. I don't think you should go to any sort of demonstration without a video camera. One, it's important to document any sort of harassment that you may receive from law enforcement, and at the same time it often is a good way to diffuse people who are very aggressive and confrontational. So if someone's standing in back, and the other important thing is the person standing back filming should kind of try to get a little bit removed, because jerky video footage and someone yelling while they're filming isn't very productive either. So you kind of want the videographer to stay out of this.
Yeah, at Schumacher protests that had a sort of a propensity for conflict, and not, the protesters were almost always peaceful, but there was often conflict among people who approached us wanting to pick a fight. We always had video cameras there, and we actually had legal observers from the university, from Lewis and Clark Law School, who would show up that actually had legal observer hats on. They were very clearly designated. If you can get that organized, it's really good to actually have someone assigned to doing legal observations, because it's very easy to have a video camera at the event, but that person with the video camera is off having another conversation, and all of a sudden something happens over here. And these kinds of, when it does happen, and there's a conflict, and all of a sudden someone's in your face yelling at you, or maybe they're drunk. Some people are acting belligerent or whatever. You don't want to have the person with the video camera around the corner or not paying attention. So it's good to have actually someone as a legal observer whose job on that day, their role is, all I'm doing is scanning the whole scene here and seeing if there's anything that needs to be captured on video. And it does diffuse people who are angry if they know they're being videotaped, and also if someone steps over the line and touches someone or breaks the law, you have that assault on record, and it will help in their or in the prosecution of whoever did that.
And it's also important to the converse is to not let activists get isolated and walk around a corner, or to be out of eyesight with everyone else. I mean, there's actually a couple times where I've been out of eyesight, and that's when law enforcement decides to take you off or harass someone. So the other important thing is when you anticipate a confrontation or a law enforcement presence. And again, most demonstrations are totally benign. I think in all the demonstrations we've been to, maybe one or two have resulted in high tension and people being belligerent or even violent, and that's just not the norm. Hundreds upon hundreds of demonstrations. I think someone's only thrown a punch at 2 demos out of it's a 0.5% chance of that happening. But at the same time, law enforcement is often consistently at protests and outreach events. So the other important thing is to have someone that's often designated to interface with law enforcement. And one of the most effective tactics that we found over the years, in terms especially with circus demonstrations or rodeos, they're often on what are called it's technically private property, but it's public accommodation. And so even though it's private property and it's privately owned, no one is paid admission to be in the parking lot or to be up into the gates. And so as demonstrators, unless there's clear time, place, and manner restrictions, you're allowed to actually go up there and leaflet and interface with the crowd. So the most important thing that, one of the most important lessons for us is, we always just go to the front. We go as far as we can. Even if we're not sure we can legally be there, what's the worst that's going to happen? Someone's going to tell you to leave or tell you to get back onto the sidewalk. But the most effective thing that we've been able to do is someone will come out and say, you can't be here, you're not allowed to be here. And my response has often been, no disrespect, but I've been to far more demonstrations and know the law than you do, but we're more than happy for you to call the local police and we'll talk to them. Or the cops are already there and they'll say, well, you can't be here, you can't be here. And often I got stuck being the law enforcement interface, for lack of a better word, because I've been arrested enough times so I kind of know my rights. And ironically, the only time I was convicted of trespassing was when I had an attorney, and all the other times I represented myself and won. So I paid a lot of money to go to jail for 3 weeks. But anyway, so often what we do is law enforcement would come up, you can't be here, you can't be here, and you have one person saying, well, I'm pretty sure that we can be here. I have the municipal code that says we can be here, or here's the zoning regulations, or these are the time. You always throw out prune yard decision, unite decision, you throw out abstract, Supreme Court case law, and you talk about time, place, and manner restrictions, and most of the time they scratch their head, and you're like, well, call your watch commander. So request to speak to a watch commander or a supervisor. All the while, everyone else is still passing out flyers and demonstrating and interfacing with the public. And most of the time when we found out that we were somewhere illegally where we couldn't be, by that time, the circus has already started and everyone's gone in and the crowds are gone. We're like, oh, no, sorry, you're right. Okay, we'll leave. And we leave and we go back on the sidewalk. But we've already done our job. So then an hour later, when the next cycle comes and we go back and we do it again, they call the cops. I'm pretty sure when we checked, we're allowed to be here. Same cycle over and over. Never been arrested doing that before. The only time I got arrested doing that before was when I said, law enforcement always likes to say we can do this the easy way or the hard way. So I kind of took the initiative and said, listen guys, we're going to do this the easy way or the hard way. And I was kind of being snarky, which is generally not good for diffusing conflict. And so it didn't really do well for me. So anyway. So running interface is good. Someone to deal with law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. We've had experiences at the circus demos here in Portland where, where they want you to be is usually a place where your outreach is really ineffective. And you've got to always keep in mind the animals and what your goals are, and that you need to be somewhere where you can actually do outreach to the people. And our free speech is protected, and that means that we should have a right to actually, for example, at the zoo here, they'll automatically try things like, oh, we have this painted box over here and a painted box over here, and those are our free speech zones. And you can go stand over there. And if you go stand in that little box, besides feeling silly, no one will be anywhere near you, and you'd have to shout to be heard. And of course we don't want to shout. We want to have conversations with people and tell them what we know about the truth, about what's happening to the elephants, or whatever it is, the animal that we're dealing with. And so we would just always say, no, this is a public facility. Our taxes pay for this facility, and we know our rights, and we know that as long as we're not blocking the entrance, as long as people can get around us, even if you're standing right in front of the ticket counter, if people can pass by you, you're not blocking anything. You literally have to be locking arms and blocking an entrance to be really considered blocking. But they'll always try to tell you that. Oh, you're blocking the entrance, you've got to move over here. Oh, this is not a place you can be. And so you really have to kind of know your rights and assert yourself. And we've had situations, as Nick just mentioned too, where someone was effectively able to keep the police engaged in, at OMSI, for example, when we were going against OHSU's primate research, they would try to say the sidewalk where OMSI is not a public sidewalk. Of course, you can be across the street where there is no one there, and everyone's on the other side of the street. And so we would argue that there is a 10-foot easement that is part of the public access. And the police would tell us no, and someone said, okay, well, let's call the city, because I really think this is our right to be here. And you call the city and you get nowhere. So someone refers you to someone else, and the next thing you know, you're talking to someone else and leaving a message here, and well, let me try another number. And all the while, the officer is just standing there waiting for you to try to come up with an answer, and then your outreach was only 45 minutes anyway, and you're done, and everyone leaves, and you're like, well, you never resolved the question, but maybe next time we'll figure it out, So, and actually, in the case of the Rose Quarter here and Ringling Circus and other circuses that come, we actually now have access to the whole grounds thanks to an activist named Mike D, who asserted his rights and really pushed it with the security. And finally, the security supervisor agreed, and now we can be right in line as people are buying their tickets and talking to people as they're going in. So, the more you assert your rights, the more rights you get. The more you concede your rights, the less rights you have, I think.
Yeah, I just have a question. Sometimes at our demos in Seattle, the officers will show up and they'll say, kind of like, who's in charge here?
Right.
And I'm reluctant to sort of name somebody, but is it better to have someone sort of designated to deal with the officers? And then my second question is, what's your demeanor like when you're speaking to the officers? And are you sort of like a little bit ignorant, or just like you know what you're doing, but you have a question? Like how are you, and what kinds of things do you actually say?
I think
You can go ahead.
Yeah, I think, there's a plus side to saying that we have no leader, we're individual activists here gathering. The benefit to that is that law enforcement essentially has to tell each individual person to disperse legally, for the most part. They say you're trespassing, you can't be here. So the disadvantage of saying that we have a leader is that they'll just say, okay, now you tell all your friends what to do, or you tell, and so I don't believe in, considering I pay their salary, I don't want to do their job on top of that, so do your own job. The disadvantage to that is if you have newer activists, I also don't want law enforcement going up to them and interfacing with them. So often you'll have, unfortunately, often it's me, the person who would just say, I don't represent the group, or I'm not a leader, we don't have a leader, but this is the laws, we understand it, you know, even though there isn't a sidewalk in front of the residence or the establishment, there is in almost every jurisdiction that I'm aware of is what's called a 10-foot easement. So even if there isn't a sidewalk, you can be standing on someone's personal property because there is a 10-foot public accommodation easement. I think the best way to deal with anyone, whether it's the public or law enforcement, is to be pretty dispassionate, to be more or less emotionless, to keep a calm voice. I generally also find that your body language also will incite or elicit particular responses from people. Men tend to respond differently when you approach them and you square up to them. So if you're talking to law enforcement or an individual, especially a man, at an angle like this, they actually subconsciously react to you differently. If you talk in a calm voice and you don't escalate your voice and you don't point, those are ways that often get people to interact with you differently. And so I think for most situations where it's an outreach event, dealing with law enforcement or security, we don't even deal with security guards. I don't pay attention to them. Sometimes, you know, they pay more attention to you than you'd like them to, but I think the best way to do is to just be like somewhat dispassionate, to be logical, to say this is the laws and we understand it. I'm more than happy to speak with your supervisor, your watch commander, and to not get emotional, because they expect us to be angry. And I think that's also a really effective target when not only dealing with law enforcement or the general public, is to kind of throw them off guard, to not be angry and yelling and like very emotional and with the crazy bunny hugger mentality. That throws people off, and it's disarming, and that's to your advantage when you can make someone take a step back and say, well, they just kind of defied my preconceived notion. You have a leg up on them in terms of communicating your message. I hope that.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Yeah, we're always very friendly with the police here in Portland, and we have a very good relationship with them. And quite often when the security guards who might be getting really emotional about, you know, doing, you know, these security guards, they do like nothing for, you know, a whole month, and then all of a sudden something like this happens and it blows their mind. You know, they're like, oh my God, there's a protest happening here, and they don't know how to deal with it. The police, on the other hand, deal with it constantly, and they're very good at dealing. I mean, they're very used to dealing with it. So, oftentimes with the security, you know, when they say you need to leave, and you know you have a right to be there, and it's a public place, and you assert yourself and say, no, I'm not leaving, I'm going to stay. And they say, well, we're going to call the police. What we often say is, well, that's great, because that's fine. You know, we deal with the police a lot, and the police will help educate you about what our rights are. And then the police sometimes don't even show up before the event is over, because they're busy doing real work sometimes, you know. And then we always just try to be friendly with the police and assert our rights. And, you know, basically the best way to approach, you know, as Nick said, the public as well, is you can't make someone feel the way you do about animals. The only thing you can do is offer information. And the best thing to do is just communicate with them, you know, as on one human to another, and try to give them information. And the people who are open to it are going to hear it. And the same is true for the police. I mean, we've actually had one police officer at one KFC demo decide he wasn't going to eat chicken anymore. And so sometimes you can even educate law enforcement. We just always try to take a really friendly approach.
And I think, the other thing is the other difference, it also depends region from region. Some regions it's very antagonistic towards protesters. Other regions are kind of, you know, whatever. I mean, I have a policy of generally, I ignore law enforcement and I ignore security guards, and we just walk to the street, wherever we want to be, and then we deal with it then. And sometimes it doesn't go over very well, because they are used to people, you know, like respecting their authorities. But, you know, the important thing is to know your rights, but more important than that is to assert your rights. If you don't assert your rights, you're going to do a disservice to the animals and future activists who are going to come and do the same demonstrations later. And, you know, smaller towns and cities tend to have a much more insane police response. Yeah, I mean, circus demos, we have like 6 like police cruisers with like sirens blaring, and then we were doing circus demos in like Compton and Inglewood, you know, where there's actually real crime, and law enforcement doesn't even show up, you know. So it really depends on the region, but smaller towns, the cops are more likely to be much more antagonistic and like, you know, the sky is falling because there's like people with politics in town. So.
But I think for the most part, you shouldn't have to fear like you're risking your freedom, that you're going to get arrested by going out to a demo. trespassing, especially in places like malls and amphitheaters and places where the public is invited, and we touched on this, but even if it's private property, when the public is invited to a space, you're not trespassing if you're there. You're trespassing only after you're told to leave, and then you remain there. And so you can go where you want, and when you're told to leave, if you really feel like you're risking being charged with criminal trespass because it is a private piece of property, then all you have to do is leave. Everyone can use their own comfort level of when they decide to leave. I've been on, like state fairgrounds and stuff where I really feel like I'm there. I've paid taxes that have paid for that property, and I wait for the police to show up. And then when they tell me to leave, maybe that's when we back off, but not so much if it's just a security guard who really has no powers of arrest.
And there's like never been one time that I've been arrested that I didn't see it coming a mile away. And we pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and like for 30 minutes, like they have the handcuffs out, and they don't want to arrest you either for the most part because it's more work for them, especially if they know that you're going to go limp and non-comply. Just, okay, arrest me, you can drag me out, which is like, it kind of looks silly, but it's a pain in the ass. I mean, you shouldn't make their job more, and I've never been charged with resisting arrest, or I've been charged never, whatever. You'll see arrests coming from a mile away, and they don't happen. It's like a 0.5% chance that it's going to happen, and you will see it coming. They're not just going to like jump out of the bushes and grab you.
There's some questions, yeah.
The reason I came to this session is because I wanted some advice about when we do the circus protest up in Everett, just north of Seattle, and David can attest to this because he's seen me in action when I get upset, but it is so, they are so horrible to you, these people. There's a lot of military families up there, it's a big port, and
right.
They think that you're just the devil incarnate if you dare say anything to their children or do
Right.
anything. And you're doing 3 shows a day,
Right.
Which is really hard, really intense, of an hour and a half of pure assault, verbal
Right.
assault. And have you guys ever just kind of, does it ever upset you, or do you just have the?
Pepper spray is a good response.
Well, really, I mean, because they
Sort
don't
of,
confront, they don't confront you. They just say something shitty to you and run away.
Right.
And that's the hard
Yeah.
part, because you can't even answer them.
But you can, and like we were talking about this, like this is I have found the most effective response to that when someone walks by and says, "Get a job." You say, "Thanks for your support, really appreciate it." You have a big smile on your face, and they get pissed off, and then everyone else hears that, and they're like, "Wow, they support those guys, that's awesome."
Right.
And this guy's walking away, he's just pissed off, and I've had a couple guys, "No, I told you to fuck off, thanks for your support, I really appreciate it." And they get grit, and it's really effective, and so I found like, the point is to, you don't want to, it's like victim mentality. You are taking the moral high ground. The animals are suffering far more than any discomfort that we could ever have, and so you need to put it in perspective. And at the same time, a little sarcasm goes a long way in terms of like making you like, and really like, I guarantee you try the like, "Thank you very much, we really appreciate your support." It's like golden. It's like, it saved me from like getting pepper spray and bear macing jacks. It's just,
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I feel your pain. I've been there so many times when, it's such an important issue, and we're there, selflessly, and then people are just so rude, and you can feel your palms get sweaty and you're starting to tremble sometimes, and it's very hard to not get emotional. And I think that the reality is that we are emotional people, and it's okay. And sometimes we do, and I feel like I have had a lot of experience in remaining calm in those situations, but I lose it too sometimes. And you can't beat yourself up over that either. If you get upset, you just kind of look at every situation and go, okay, how did that go? What would I have done differently next time? How could I have de-escalated that? Or in some ways, you just kind of have to get a thick skin. You have to realize the reason you're there for the animals. Their suffering is great, and try to really cherish those moments where you get the positive feedback that why you're there. someone says, you know, I got one of these leaflets 6 months ago, I haven't eaten meat since. Or, you know what, I saw you guys at the circus, I'm never coming back again. You know, thank you for being here. Whatever it is. You never get those?
The thing is that you have to realize, like, as a kid, you know, as a kid, like, I saw people protesting circuses, and like, and it didn't register with me then, you know, I was really young, and like, I guarantee you, you know, like, you've made an impact on a kid's life. They'll remember what you did, and
Yeah, the kids do.
it is.
They look really hard.
Yeah.
You gotta understand, like, I'm the same way. Like, you know, there's, you reach your breaking point, and I think it's important for us to realize, like, that, you know, I tend to have an easier job being emotionless and like not, I mean, I'm angry, but I don't display it on the outside, and I think I have an easier job of doing that than a lot of people, but it does take its toll, and I think like one of the important things is to know your limit, you know, and I don't think it's such a bad, maybe in my younger years, you know, I've been like, oh, you know, you shouldn't take a rest, the animals don't get a rest. But, you know, take some time off to like realize, you know, like, why am I feeling this way? And after every demonstration, if you've lost it, you know, to reanalyze what set you off and what you could do differently, and kind of turn it into a way to become a more effective activist, and also to bond with your community, you know, after demonstration. You know, people just go somewhere and hang out, you know, or just like do something that, you know, put some classical music on in your car when you're leaving. But it's important to like have your community support, because it's not an easy path, you know, and it's not easy. You know.
I'm just wondering about those instances we just described where, you know, it's a pretty antagonistic, you're usually at an event where people are just wanting to go in and you're bringing up something that they don't want to hear. I'm just wondering if does that suggest maybe think about the tactics? And I'm not sure it does, but maybe those times it feels like you're going through a great deal and you're questioning, gosh, is it really worth it? And I'm just wondering, does that suggest a way to get at the issue other than maybe that's just not the most fruitful way to do it? I don't know.
Well, I think that those things need to be evaluated. I can think of one example, like March of Dimes, leafleting. Some activists have backed off of that because here's another charity, you're raising money to help babies, or these people are all there giving their free time to help babies and walk for babies, and you're there leafleting to say, your donation is hurting animals. You know, that's a really intense confrontation, and it really draws out some really negative reactions. But I've really actually felt like I've had some really meaningful discussions, and I think that when things are really intense like that, and I mean, if there's no conflict at all, you might not be being effective, because we're really trying to challenge the status quo here and people's basic premise about how they relate to animals on so many levels, and it's a very challenging thing. But I think that learning like the nuances of when someone is unreachable and when they might be open to converse with you more is something that you learn over time. You know, like say a woman comes up to you, you're at the circus, and they say, you just don't know this zoo. You know, you don't know what you're talking about. This is a great zoo. Well, you could just blow her off, or you could try to say, well, tell me about the zoo. You know, like actually listen, try to have a conversation. Don't just be at the event thinking I have something to tell you, but be open to what do they have to tell you. Like what do you think about the zoo? What do you love about the zoo? Why do you think it's a great zoo that's humane? And really genuinely listen to people when they're upset, because that's very disarming. And I've had a hunter come up to me at a Schumacher demo and say, walking out of Schumacher's with a garment bag, they just bought a fur, and the guy said, I'm a hunter, and you know, don't even try to tell me anything about blah, blah, blah. And I walked with him for a minute and I said, okay, so I'm assuming that you are ethical about the way that you hunt. Are you very careful that you want to kill that animal cleanly? You would never want to shoot an animal and have that deer go off and suffer somewhere. And he was like, yeah. And then he started talking about how great of a hunter he was and how important it was for him to make sure that the animal didn't suffer. And then I said, well, I worked on a fur farm, and this is what's really happening to these fur animals, and this is what I experienced. And by the end of like a block, he had stopped, and we started having a conversation, and like, you know, I don't know, they had already bought something, I don't know, but I really feel like I had made a connection there with someone who normally I could never have related to because they had such a preconceived idea of who I was, and maybe, we need to let our guard down about who other people are, because everyone evolves and changes slowly, and even hunters become vegetarians, So I think that, everything is an opportunity if you kind of look at it that way and really try to allow yourself to hear people.
But
Oh,
I think like you were saying though, like conflict, if there isn't conflict and there isn't discomfort and there isn't controversy, then we're not doing our job, right? I mean, we're challenging the status quo. So, but at the same time, like, you have activists on one side who don't want conflict and want to just, everything like hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and the world doesn't change that way. But at the same time, there's also activists who always want to play the martyr and get arrested and get sued. And it's like, well, yeah, there's a lot of conflict, but is there efficacy there? Is that effective? And a lot of people just want to protest for the sake of having a protest because they don't know what else to do. And I don't fault people for that. At least you're doing something. It may not be very effective, but I think as a movement, we constantly need to reassess, like, is protesting really effective? Is standing out in front of some really all that effective? Or I think a better analysis is to be, is it worth my time? Is the time and the cost-benefit analysis really there? Have I invested this much time and this much money? Is it really worth it? And I think that's a conversation you always have to have with yourself. And similarly, at a demonstration, your time cost-benefit analysis with individuals. You can spend 10, 20 minutes arguing with somebody, and you're not going to get anywhere. And you've just missed the opportunity to talk to how many other people. And so if your interactions with individuals, you also need to have a cost-benefit analysis. How much time am I going to invest in this person? And am I getting any leeway with them? And so often we have, what's called, a time waster. And so someone will come up and they want to argue with you. They want to be combative. And you said, I'm sorry, or it's kind of a running joke. It's a time waster. Say, okay, well, have a nice day. Other people, you can kind of, again, if you can disarm people and kind of shatter that preconceived notion that we're all crazy and we're all angry and we're all like waving signs and we're just crazy, you disarm people and you can actually engage in the conversation. No one likes being told what to do, and that's the first thing as an animal rights activist you need to realize is you're not going to change the world by telling people what to do. You need to have a dialogue, a discourse, and provide people with an option and an alternative to exploitation. Sorry, you also had a question earlier, sorry.
Yeah, my question was, what do you do in situations where you know the law, you know you're on the right side, and the police are denying you your rights? They're denying you to allow you to stand and protest or hand out leaflets. What do you do in that situation?
This is America, that's what right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess at that point, I think you need to have a discussion with your group about testing that authority and really maybe orchestrate an arrest with someone who's willing to get arrested with everything in place, someone with a video camera, an attorney present. Know that you have an attorney that's willing to follow that person through their court case. If it comes down to it, and assert your rights, because if you have a clear case and you have pro bono attorney help and you have everything lined up, then you will help activists coming down the road.
I'm in England, in town, but I'm an activist in Spain, and I've been on the point of being arrested for handing out leaflets.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been at that point that I've been told, you are going to be spending the night in the cell if you continue to hand out leaflets.
Yeah,
This is in Madrid. And
I was
it's
in
been-
handcuffs for giving out free ice cream in front of Baskin Robbins.
And so I've been on that point. I thought, okay, so I should be standing up for my rights, but I don't want to go to
You got to pick your battle. Plain and
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah, if it's not worth it, if there's another place that you could go and leaflet and reach the same people, that's probably a better option.
But for me personally, like, no one's gonna. If I know my rights, I'm not backing down. Like, I won't. Like, it's not in my DNA. When I know that I'm right, no one is gonna. And so if that ends up in me getting arrested, then I'm gonna get arrested. But with every time, again, it's a cost-benefit analysis. And every time I've been arrested, I've made sure that they've spent 1,000 times more money and resources to prosecute me than I spent defending myself. And so you need to have that analysis where if you arrest me, I'm not just going to pay a fine. I'm not going to bail out of jail. I'm not, if you arrest me, I'm not going to pay bail. I'm not, if you're able to do this. And again, you'll see the arrest coming from a mile away. And if you're willing to stand your ground and you're willing to get arrested, you need, again, tactically to not make it worth their while. You need to make them, I mean, we've had cases where we arrested and they had 9 bar panel attorneys representing us all, what's it called? We had public defenders, essentially, and every time there was a court date, we cost about $10,000. And so that's going to make them reassess arresting people in the future. So you can either go on the defensive and be arrested and challenge it in the court, and then at the same time turn the court, and if you go to the jury, into a complete circus, no pun intended, and educate people. Or you can also go on the offensive, which I think is a much more effective way to file lawsuits and to get someone to sue, which is a lot more. We have so many animal rights attorneys now. It's a lot. I mean, it's possible. Does someone else have? I'm sorry.
How is it? Is there any change in terms of our government actually being accountable in terms of that, the police departments and stuff? I'm thinking of like in Tacoma, something that happened last year was a taste of Tacoma where people were trying to leaflet and they were told by the cops. And, I mean, are the cops, if you inform them of your rights, are they getting any better?
Don't deal with the cops. I mean, that's the first thing. Don't deal with some schlep who like doesn't know the law. I mean, because often they have a mentality that, and again, this is not the norm. Like 0.5% of the time going to a protest, it'll result in an arrest. It rarely happens. But again, a guy who just drives around in a circle around the neighborhood all day, like, you know, passing out like tickets, he doesn't know the law. So often they'll arrest you and then let the court sort it out. So you request to speak with a supervisor or, you know, again, a watch commander. And ideally, if you have, you can go on the website, you look up your city, and then you look up municipal code, and most cities have the municipal code online, which will say what exactly you can and can't do. And if you hand that to them, and again, if you have it on video camera.
Have you had, like you said, you have a pretty friendly relationship with
Me?
or whatever. You guys with, you know, in Portland, it seems like, you know.
Well, I mean, there's been lawsuits that have been precedent-setting here. You know, when the protests happened back in the day and kids were getting pepper sprayed, you know, they won civil claims against the city. So I think this, you know, there's been a lot of confrontation that has resulted in the police getting better educated and dealing with protesters better. I think it's, you know, as has been said, it's region by region or city by city how that has operated. But certainly in Portland, you know, over time, having protesters be defended by our attorneys here has benefited. And judges, I mean, everyone all the way up the line has been educated up to the judges are now finding in our favor more often than they ever were in the early days. So I think that, you know, asserting your rights is important. And I can't emphasize more, you know, I don't want you to leave from this experience or this talk feeling like you're going to go out and get arrested. Really, almost always getting arrested is a personal choice. Almost always you're given many opportunities to not get arrested. Even if someone tries to tell you that you're violating a rule or something, usually it's always your choice. Most activist arrests are things that are planned out in advance that are civil disobedience. It's not usually a surprise kind of thing.
I mean, literally, like I said, you'll see it coming from a mile away. They don't just arrest you out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And either way, whether it's like 0.5%, you know, chance of it happening. But no matter what you do, whether it's like protesting at a Target or dealing with law enforcement, it's always, they look at the bottom line. And if it costs more money to prosecute activists, then they're not going to do it for the most part. If it costs more money to host the circus on public property or city property, they're probably not going to do it. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your response is usually to people who counter with the argument that you should be doing human rights over animal rights.
I'm all support. You know, I would like to know what you're doing for animal rights, and I'll totally support you. Exactly. My response is always, I totally support you. You know, do you have a flyer I can take? Because I would love to support your cause of helping humans. And they're like, well, I'm not doing anything. So I'm all for animal rights. You know, often I'll say, you know, there's, you know, I mean, most people aren't going to respond to, you know, there's one segment of the world of the entire population on the planet that is subjected to more misery and exploitation and suffering than any other, and that's the animal population, the non-human animal population. often I'll say this is the path I've decided to go down, but I'm sympathetic and I've worked on these struggles. But again, I think just again responding with a question and saying, what are you doing to help people? And not to be snarky and not to be like an asshole, but to just say, like, what are you doing? I'd like to know because I want to support you in what you're doing. And most of the time they'll shut the fuck up because they don't do anything.
Yeah, I like to try to give people an opportunity to talk. At least try to see if you can start a conversation with them, but not waste too much time on it. But yeah, ask them, well, what is important to you? And one of the things I like to say is, I do care about people, and I do have a child, and I do care about what happens to people, and I know that there are people suffering all over the world. My view on it is that, first of all, harming animals leads to more harm towards humans. The way we treat our animals, if someone's willing to hurt an animal, the very next thing, and we've seen this with serial killers, the one commonality between them is that they abuse animals when they're kids. And so, I say, I don't think compassion has to have bounds. I don't think that I don't think that we have to have limits to our compassion and say, well, once our compassion runs out for humans, once we resolve all these issues, then we need to do this for animals next. I can have compassion for both simultaneously and not choose one over the other. And there's lots of people that work on human issues, and the animals having a voice. Whatever you say, some of those types of comments, you just have to realize those are the people that are not reachable. They're just not open at this point. Maybe in a year that something will happen in their life and maybe they'll see it differently. But you can't waste too much time on getting bogged down by people who are really closed to the message and just focus on them. Most people are compassionate. Most people just don't know what's really happening to animals. That's what we have to focus on, is those people who, the difference between the average person and an animal rights activist is just how much information they have. We just happen to know a lot more about the details of what's happening to animals, and most people have a certain amount of compassion, so that's who we're trying to reach, I think.
Oh, well, we leaflet for vegan outreach, and recently one of our members was leafleting at the waterfront park during the Doggy Dash, which is a fundraiser for the Humane Society. And I wasn't there, but I heard secondhand that the person in charge told them they could not do that there because it was contrary to their beliefs or what they stood for. And so they asked them to leave, and when they pointed out it was a public place, they said, well, but we've got a permit, so we control this area.
No, again, that's what don't deal with some schlep who's working at the office. They don't know the law. They'll say they have a permit, and you'll see, again, like Matt said, well, let's call the local police, and you'll understand that so long as no one's paid admission to go there, whether it's a parking lot or it's up to the gates to enter the circus or to the event, you're allowed to be there. No one has. There's certain time, place, and manner restrictions, but if they haven't designated time, place, and manner restrictions, if they don't have a policy that's, especially in California, but it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but for the most part, in almost every state, there's time, place, and manner restrictions. Case law that says if they haven't established a place where you're allowed to be and rules and regulations for handling free speech activity, they can't tell you to leave legally. But again, the other thing to understand is what is legal and what they can do. Two different things. The law may be on your side, but cross your fingers, it doesn't always work that way. But again, if people haven't paid admission to be somewhere, more likely than not, you're allowed to be there, and just suggest that call on law enforcement, and then request a supervisor or a watchman. Go up the chain. But by and large, you're allowed to be somewhere where people haven't paid admission to go, even if it is private property.
Okay.
Unless it's a private residence. What it's called public accommodation, quasi pseudo-public property. It's private, it's owned by the private, but the public is allowed to go, like malls, for example. Most malls have time, place, and manner restrictions, and so if you want to protest there, you need to fill out permits or paperwork. But by and large, if it's public access, you're allowed to be there legally. Don't. I'm just kidding. But I mean, look at the municipal code. It'll be in the municipal code.
Okay.
And I'll give you my email address if you have questions.
What do you do if you're at a protest and you see a passersby jump on one of your protesters and start wailing on them? What's that?
Okay.
Okay. No, because I worry about that sometimes. I worry about, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to, I need to think about how I'm going to respond and what's the most, or what's the way that I'm not, that I can diffuse the situation without making myself liable for prosecution or something. And
Right. Well, I think, trying to be aware of that situation before it gets to that point. I mean, I know things can happen and someone who just has the intention to ambush you. I've never really actually heard of that happening. But if it did, there's nothing that you can do to stop that. But don't ever let anyone be isolated. Like, don't let someone be in a situation where they're getting intimidated or getting cornered by someone or getting threatened without someone else also being there. Having video cameras there, even like if it's a big area, and you're there with other people, exchange cell phone numbers. If you know someone's going to be way over there, find out who they are, get their cell phone number so someone can make a phone call. I would, if I saw that, call 911 if the police weren't already there. I guess you have to do what you have to do. If someone is actually getting physically assaulted, I would try to intervene in that. Hopefully other
Always have
people.
a video camera.
But yeah, try to get it on video if possible and capture that. But try to de-escalate those situations before they happen are a lot better. Walk away from that. Don't have an ego about it. If someone is getting up in your face, just try to get away from them. Know that, you're not going to, there's no good outcome that's going to come from arguing with them. So there's no point in staying engaged and just try to get away, get disengaged. Try agreeing with them. If someone's being belligerent, just agree with whatever they're saying, no matter how ridiculous it is, just to get them to just to appeal to whatever their need is to be right about that situation. Just agree with them. Just walk away. In that moment, that might be the best way to get out of a hairy situation that is, not going to really. You're not going to, help the animals by getting a black eye or broken nose. So. And we're out of time, so.
Right.
Look at your face when all I could see was myself looking back at me. Reflection.